The Cronarch Institute had been studying the boundary of time for 340 years. It sat on Station Meridian Zero, a research platform built into the frozen shell of a dead star, chosen because the gravitational lensing there let its instruments look further back than anywhere else in the coalition. Its graduation rate was 41%. Of the species that applied, only 6 had ever produced a graduate ranked in the top tier of pre-inflation cosmology. In 340 years, the Institute had admitted 11 humans. 3 had graduated. The current cohort had 1. The Institute did not measure prestige in credits or fleet postings. It measured prestige in a single number: how far back a researcher's models could reach before the mathematics collapsed into noise. Most careers ended somewhere around the first 10 to the minus 32nd of a second after the universe began. A handful of the Institute's most decorated alumni had pushed that boundary to 10 to the minus 40th. No one, in the Institute's recorded history, had ever produced a verified reading from before the beginning itself. This was not considered possible. It was not considered a research question. It was considered, by every serious cosmologist on the station, a category error. The way asking what is north of the North Pole is not a hard question, but a question that does not apply. The seminar room where Cohort 12 gathered each week was 3 levels below the observation deck, in a section of the station old enough that the walls still carried the original construction plating, dented and patched over 3 centuries. It was not glamorous. It did not need to be. Everyone who sat in that room had already survived the admissions process that eliminated 94% of applicants before they ever saw the inside of the station. This was the room the story starts in. Idris Cade was listed on the admissions record as 29 years old, human, origin unconfirmed. Director Pharaoh Leon had read his file 4 times. Not because it was long, it was short, shorter than any other file in the cohort, but because the 3rd page contained a single line that did not resolve no matter how many times the verification algorithms ran it. Under point of origin, the file read, recovered adrift null-time rift Corval boundary, no prior records, no prior existence indicators. The verification team had assumed equipment error. They ran it 7 times. It came back the same 7 times. Cade had been found by a coalition salvage crew 11 years earlier, drifting inside a debris field with no ship, no suit failure, and no explanation for how a human being had survived unprotected inside a null-time rift for an unknown duration. He had no memory of arriving there. He had, when recovered, one object in his hand, a small brass hourglass, its glass cracked along one seam, the sand inside it never settling to the bottom no matter how long it was left standing. He had not mentioned any of this during his interview. When asked about his background, he had said only that he was interested in the mathematics of the boundary, and that he thought the boundary was probably not where everyone assumed it was. He arrived at the station 3 days before the term began, found his quarters, unpacked a single case of instruments, and began reading the assigned material. He did not introduce himself to the cohort. He did not need to. The file had already done that, for the 2 people on the station who had read it. For the first 5 weeks, Cade did nothing to distinguish himself from any other diligent student. He sat in the 3rd row, always the same seat, and took notes by hand in a script none of the instructors recognized. He submitted his assignments on time, scored in the upper third of the cohort without ever scoring highest, and asked questions only when a concept genuinely confused him. Twice, other cadets tried to draw him into the informal debates that ran through the residence hall after seminars. Debates about whose homeworld had produced the better cosmologists, whose species understood time more intuitively. Cade listened to both arguments in full before saying that he did not think intuition had much to do with it, and that the instruments did not care what anyone's homeworld believed. The debates continued without him after that. He did not seem to mind. The challenge came in week 6, during the open seminar on pre-inflation boundary conditions. Cadet Ren Akoros was a Threll, third year, ranked first in the cohort's boundary modeling scores for 2 consecutive terms. He had earned that ranking. His models were precise, his citations exhaustive, and his presentations delivered with the particular fluency of someone who had never once had his framework seriously challenged. Threll culture treated the boundary question as close to sacred. The moment before existence was, in their tradition, the one true mystery, the place where even their oldest philosophers stopped and admitted they had nothing further to say. Akoros had built his entire academic identity around respecting that silence with rigor rather than mysticism. He did not consider this arrogance. He considered it discipline. He introduced the human question the way that certain cadets introduce questions, which is to say, with the timing and tone of someone who has prepared it, waiting for the moment in the discussion where it would land hardest. "Cade," he said, "your species arrived in coalition space 400 years ago and still argues about the age of your own homeworld's mountains. I am curious." A pause, calibrated. "When exactly did you arrive in this universe?" Several cadets smiled. It was the particular category of smile that appears in rooms where a hierarchy is being quietly enforced, not cruel, not even unkind, simply the shared recognition of where everyone stood. Director Leon, at the head of the table, said nothing. He had pulled Cade's raw sensor logs in week 2. He had been waiting for the right discussion topic since. "That's a reasonable question," Cade said, in the tone of someone who genuinely found it reasonable. Akoros' smile held. "Do you want my recovery date," Cade said, "or my causal signature?" The room went quiet in a way it had not been quiet before. "Your causal signature," Akoros said. Cade said a number. It was not a date. It was a timestamp, expressed the way the Institute expressed all boundary-adjacent measurements, as an offset from the inflation event in seconds to 11 decimal places. The number was negative. The silence that followed did not arrive all at once. It arrived the way a wave arrives, the cadets closest to Akoros first, then spreading outward across the table. "That's not a valid reading," Akoros said. His voice had not changed, but something underneath it had. "It's not," Director Leon agreed and opened the file he had been carrying since week 2, which is why I had it checked 3 times by 3 separate instrument arrays that do not share code. He did not summarize what he had found. He put it on the table, one piece at a time, and let it speak for itself. The first was the original salvage log from the crew that recovered Cade, timestamped against the Rift's own decay signature. The debris field's radioactive markers, which decay at a fixed and unfalsifiable rate. The math placed Cade's presence inside that field beginning at a point the salvage crew's own instruments could not explain, and had flagged as equipment failure at the time. The second was Meridian Zero's own boundary array, run against Cade during a routine student calibration exercise in week 3. An exercise every cadet had done, including Akoros, producing unremarkable results for everyone else in the cohort. Cade's result had been quietly excluded from the class dataset. Leon had kept it. The third was not a simulation. It was documentary sensor footage from a deep space causality station on the far side of the Corval boundary, recorded 11 years earlier, independent of the salvage crew, independent of the Institute, that had picked up a causal disturbance at the Rift consistent with something entering local spacetime from outside its light cone. The station had filed it as an anomaly and closed the case. No one had ever cross-referenced it with a recovered human until Leon did in week 4. By the third piece of evidence, Akoros was not smiling. He was watching with the expression of someone doing a calculation that was going to take considerably longer than the class period to finish. Leon continued. The fourth piece was the hourglass. He had sent it with Cade's permission to the Institute's materials lab. The sand inside had been tested for isotopic decay. It returned no measurable age. Not young, not old. The lab's final note appended to the report read, "Sample does not register on any decay curve we have. Recommend further study. Recommend caution." The fifth piece was simpler than all the others, and it was the one that finally settled the room. It was a single overlay. Cade's causal signature, plotted against the universe's own inflation curve. On the same graph the cohort had used all term to plot every other measurement they had ever taken. His point sat to the left of 0. Everyone in that room had spent 6 weeks learning that nothing sat to the left of 0. That the boundary was not a wall to be crossed, but a place where the question itself stopped meaning anything. And here was a point on their own graph, generated by their own instruments, refusing to observe that rule. No one spoke. Cade did not speak either. He sat with his hands folded on the table, watching the graph with the room, the same expression he had worn since the discussion began, not smug, not vindicated, simply attentive, as though he were seeing the number confirmed for the first time alongside everyone else. Leon was not finished. He added a sixth item to the table, smaller than the others, a single line of transcript from the salvage crew's own recorder, taken in the minutes after they first pulled Cade from the debris field. It was not evidence in the way the other 5 pieces were evidence. It was a record of confusion. 3 crew members talking over each other, trying to explain to their own logs why the man they had just recovered had no heat signature, no radiation exposure, and no discernible entry point into the wreckage. They found him inside, as though he had not arrived in the debris field so much as the debris field had arrived around him. The crew had closed the incident as unexplained and moved on. No one had reopened it in 11 years. "I'm not showing you this to prove anything further," Leon said. "The overlay already does that. I'm showing you this because I want the room to understand that the number is not new. It has been sitting in a closed file for 11 years, unread, because no one had a reason to ask the question out loud until today." Akoro stared at the overlay for a long moment. "This isn't possible," he said finally. Not a challenge, an observation spoken by someone recalculating everything he had built his ranking on. "No," Leon said, "it isn't. That's why I checked it 3 times. The seminar ended without anyone formally ending it. Cadets filed out in a silence that was not the silence of embarrassment, but of people quietly rebuilding something they had assumed was fixed. Akoro stopped at the door. "The offset," he said, not turning around. 0.003 seconds before inflation. That's not a large number." "No," Cade said, "it isn't. It should be 0. Everything is supposed to start at 0. "I know," Cade said. "I don't have a better answer than that." Akoro's nodded once, the way a person nods when they are filing something away rather than arguing it, and left without another word. He did not look humiliated. He looked like someone whose models now had one more variable in them than they had that morning, and who intended to spend a long time deciding what to do with it. Cade gathered his materials. He picked up the hourglass last, turning it once in his hand before slipping it into his coat, the sand inside shifting without ever settling. "You've had my log since week 2, Cade said to Leon. "I have. You didn't tell me." "No," Leon said. "I wanted to see what you'd say when someone asked you directly without knowing I already had the answer." A pause. "Most people, given a number like that, either hide it or perform it. You did neither. It's just what the instruments say." "That's exactly my point," Leon said. Cade said nothing further. He picked up his case, nodded once, and walked out, the same unhurried pace he had used to walk in 11 weeks earlier. Leon stood alone in the empty seminar room for a while after the door closed. Then he opened the cohort's assessment file, found Cade's entry, and against the field marked Origin Classification, he wrote 3 words. "Predates the record." He closed the file and went to go find out what exactly that meant. 3 months later, Akoro submitted a revised thesis proposal to the review board. It was not about human cognition, and it was not about rankings. It was a single question, stated in the same precise language he used for everything. Whether the boundary the Institute had spent 340 years treating as an edge might instead be a threshold, a place things could cross, rather than a place where mathematics simply stopped. The board rejected the proposal on its first submission, citing insufficient grounding. Okoro's resubmitted it 4 months after that, with Cade's causal signature listed as a single data point among several dozen. He had spent the intervening time gathering from archives across the coalition. 7 other unexplained readings in 7 other closed files, going back over a century, all filed under equipment error, all never cross-referenced with each other until Okoro's did it himself. The board accepted the second proposal without comment. Cade heard about the acceptance from Leon, in passing, in the same seminar room where the question had first been asked. He did not seem surprised, and he did not seem particularly pleased either. He only said that he thought Okoro's had asked a better question the second time, and that the instruments would tell them whether it was the right one.